Right, I've got half an hour with you and I'm going to try and make it as practical and as informative as possible. Obviously, I'm advocating for mid-sized business. I'm here to talk about the virtues of mid-sized business, and I think I'm probably preaching to the converted a little in this room today. So we'll err on the practical side of what we learned in the study and how that perhaps can be leveraged by the leaders in the room. While there is a Q&A at the end, and I'm more than happy to stay on and answer any questions that you have, I would really welcome questions through the presentation and make this as informal as possible. It's an intimate group, and in my experience, I think the richness comes from the dialogue and some of the Q&A. So please do feel to throw a hand up and ask a question, given the intimacy of the group. I'll do my best to answer the question. So today is Hiding in the Light. It is the results. I'm going to share with you the results of the mid-sized business leaders study, which has been 3 years in the making. I'd like to start by just sharing where the report came from and what the impetus behind it was. For those of you that don't know how good and important and vital MSBs are, I'm going to give you a little snapshot of their role in our local economy and our national economy, and then I'm going to move into the findings and share 5 key findings with you that I think could be practical and interesting, I hope, to fill the morning. Does that sound okay? Right. So, in 2014, I immigrated here with my 3 kids, having spent 12 years in Asia. And that year that we arrived, I got the very sad news that my mother had passed away. I went back to Australia to attend to her affairs, and my brother and my sister and I packed up my mother's belongings and house in just under a week. And it occurred to me, I was so struck by how quickly the material self can be packed up and non-existent. I was also struck by my mother's tremendous legacy that she left. She was a journalist and an author. And first and foremost, she used those skills as a social advocate. And she championed the rights of women and children and the elderly. And her work, she was a very successful journalist. She had a TV program and a full page in the national newspaper and a radio program. She used that platform to create meaningful change for people. She changed laws, and she raised those issues and changed people's lives for the better. And I realised, although her material self was gone, there was this tremendous legacy that was left. And it would be enduring, and it made people's lives better on a daily basis. And I was inspired to do something similar. But I had a problem. I didn't have that platform, and I certainly didn't have the worthy skills that I would call a real job, teaching and nursing and caring, where there's that human connection where you can actually make someone's day a little easier, or enrich their lives, or look after a child and raise their hopes. I don't have those skills. So I returned to the UK with a desire to do something different. And that's what's behind Mid-Sized Business Leaders. I was serving on the board of a small business at the time and a mid-size, and I had just left a large enterprise listed board. And it was a bit of an epiphany, really. I had a dearth of support and resources in my startup and scale-up environment. And at the listed end, it's follow the bouncing ball. It's a bit hard to get it wrong in a listed environment. You know, you've got governance teams, you've got audit partners, you've got company secretaries, corporate affairs, investor relations. They're all there to support you. But in the middle, we had nothing. If we had anything, we had to extrapolate resources from large enterprise resources or from small business. And neither of them seemed to fit right. And that's where MSBLeaders came from. Its first and primary mission is to advocate that MSBs, mid-sized business, are their own distinct category with unique needs that aren't the same as large business and aren't the same as small business. So the study had to do that first and foremost. We had to empirically prove that the issues were different. We then wanted to answer the million-dollar question, which what is an MSB? So we did that too. And then we also discovered what their issues and their priorities were, rather than assuming them. So that's what's behind the study. It's meant to be a systemic change that has a ripple effect to improve mid-sized business performance. And how that affects people on a daily basis is because mid-sized businesses are a huge part of regional economies, the economies in which I'm raising my children, and this wonderful home that's turned the weather on today that I've adopted. MSBs are critical to improving the prosperity of regional communities. So if we help MSBs, we help regional communities, we close the gap, and hopefully we make people's lives a little bit better. So this is an important study because it's catalytic and it's systemic. So one of the things we learned, so this was our starting point, our hypotheses. MSBs are critical to the UK economy. I used to think they were important, now I think they're critical. For any of you in the audience today that is in fact an MSB or in an MSB, leading an MSB or advising an MSB, you're about to feel pretty fantastic. Here's why. MSBs contribute disproportionately. Although they make up a tiny fraction of the business community, just 1.5% of all businesses, they contribute 1/3 of national turnover and 22% of tax receipts. Just think about that in real terms. And think about if we extrapolate a volume growth in MSBs, if we had more MSBs, imagine what that kind of impact would be on our economy. MSBs outperform on growth and profit. They've grown faster and generated larger profit growth over the last 5 years than small and large business combined. MSBs have created more jobs in the UK over the last 12 months than both large and small companies combined. And they outstrip everybody in terms of productivity. They're the most productive segment ahead of larger and smaller companies. And they're also new economy leaders. MSBs spent $3.8 billion on R&D. That's 20% of the entire UK R&D spend. But remember, they're only 1.5% of total businesses. Now, the reason this particular statistic's important is if you think about our national industrial strategy and our local industrial strategy and our economic roadmap, we are heading towards, our ambition is to become a value creation economy, to create ideas and IP that other economies cannot, and then scale that. That's a value creation economy. That's our ambition, and that's built on innovation and invention, scaling, prototyping, productizing. MSBs do this really well. So they're an incredibly important spearhead if we're going to realise some of our industrial strategy ambitions. They're also critical to regional economies. People are blown away by this statistic. 76% of MSBs are located outside London. The highest concentrations are here in the northeast, in the northwest, east and southeast. And employment in the MSBs is highest in the northwest and Midlands. You're all aware of the Power Up the North campaign that was launched last week. Well, here's the silver bullet. If we can get MSBs fueled, supported with targeted support, relevant support, we have a main line into our local economy. The number of MSBs is increasing while the number of small and large enterprise is decreasing. Despite all this, MSBs are woefully underserved. In our research and through my own experience, I've learned no one's clear on what actually an MSB is. Resources and information are vendors supplied, so they're often biased, or at best, they limit the services that the supplier is able to offer. So if you're a leader in a mid-sized business and you need to know about a range of topics, contemporary topics, usually the content and resources that's available online or events, programs are usually reflecting the services that can be provided, such as audit and finance. So the biggest advocates for MSBs are people like Grant Thornton, BDO, Shoesmiths, EY, Cisco. They're all providing advocacy and education, but only within their field of expertise. But mid-sized business leaders need to have a 360 view of issues that sometimes aren't vendor supplied. They vary widely in robustness and independence. I've seen lots of research which are actually sort of a typed up version of a round table, and they're insights and they're valuable, but they're not evidence-based research. This is the main one. Most support and resources and programs, certification and memberships, even the IOD memberships and all their material is geared wholeheartedly to large enterprise. And I'm sure you can all empathise with this. They're verbose, they're difficult to wade through, they're not on demand, they're not rich media, and they're lacking practical information and practical usable information, which in an MSB, you're running fast. So you need things that you can take out of what you've learned and apply straight away. Incredibly disparate and difficult to find. There's lots of information out there, but pulling it into one place is impossible. Took a team of 3 or 4 full-time people to do that as part of this study. And it can't be easily accessed in demand or in private. And I include the in private in there because I think it's worth acknowledging that ego does get in the way in asking the silly questions. Doesn't bother me. I'm quite happy to put my hand up and ask the silly questions on a regular basis. But for many, in formal environments, in leading a team and trying to inspire and provide confidence to your teams, being seen not to have all the answers can be a problem. So I think we need to provide resources that are definitely available privately and on demand and affordably. That was our starting point. Massive contributors to the economy and social value, yet woefully underserved. So we set out to run a 3-year study that pulled all the research into one place so we could paint an accurate picture of MSBs and their value. We also wanted to develop a classification, an empirically based classification that answered the question once and for all, what is an MSB? And thirdly, we wanted to know empirically what were their issues and priorities, not assume them. And these are some of the results today. So I'm going to walk you through very briefly what an MSB is and what makes them so special, MSBs and people, MSBs' relationship with technology, innovation, the impact of Brexit on MSBs, and the combined impact on MSB growth and their ambition. Sound okay? Yeah, I'll do all that in the next 15 minutes. I should add that this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's some executive summaries on your desks, but there's also the full report if anyone wants to take home the tome that it is. So what's a mid-sized business? We identified more than 12 different classifications across government, HMRC, and the ecosystem suppliers, advise, analytics and research firms they support. So it's no surprise that people can't answer the question when some of the research is using apples against oranges, when some of the suppliers are using apples against oranges. We need to have the same classification. To capture the stretch of this ambiguity, you are an MSB if you turn over between 10 and 500 million and have 20 to 2,000 employees. So for the leaders in the room, think about the difference of your business if you would have had 20 staff versus 2,000. It's incomparable, isn't it? 10 million, 500 million, completely different model of business. So if you're trying to search for services and resources or advisors that can help you or partners that can help you, having a classification is incredibly important. If you walk into the pharmacy and say, I have a sore throat, when in fact you have a tummy bug, the pharmacy is going to give you something for the sore throat, not the tummy bug. And it's the equivalent when people can't self-identify as to what type of business they are. We need a lighthouse framework for MSBs that can say, I'm an MSB, I fall into this category, therefore I need these types of services. So let's look at a more meaningful classification. The ideal classification for MSBs is 10 to 149 million with 50 to 499 employees. This is the category that had the most in common. Notwithstanding some outliers and some major crossover, particularly in some sectors, this was the category that shared the most in terms of ambition, priorities, and demography. This is the classification we should be using. This is what our government should adopt for their research and their regulations and their strategy, their policy strategy. And this is what we are advocating economic actors such as EY, the growth interventionists such as GMCA's Growth Company and others start to adopt in both their research and their resource provision. So I'm going to share with you now some of the learnings from the report. So we understand now what the framework is. Let's have a look at their superpower. MSB's superpower is agility. And that agility is what I'd describe as a defining quality of MSBs. It's an agility that's both structural in terms of their infrastructure and their leadership mindset. It's incredibly unique to MSBs. It's their ability to manage the best and worst of small business and large simultaneously. And that's a defining quality of being an MSB. So think about that for a moment. When you're managing staff, when you're managing money, when you're managing markets, you've got the same issues as small business and large simultaneously. And that came through as one of the major definitions of identifying an MSB, is the ability to manage small and large simultaneously. And I'll give you some real world examples. The first would be MSBs reported as being small enough to remain responsive to and dynamic to market movement, but large enough to invest in product development to respond to it. In the case of technology, MSBs are large enough to adopt new tech and new tech processes, but small enough to implement the business process re-engineering that sits around it, which is actually where the real gains are often made and what large business really struggle with. So they can simultaneously reconcile challenges such as short-term versus long-term, team leadership versus individual leadership. Most MSB leaders can still walk through their offices and know every staff member's name and individually know about their kids, but will lead as a team. They have formal and informal communications, and they have accountability with agility. And I think when you think about this flexibility and this agility at a leadership level, but also at a board level, we see lots of examples of what I call celebrity business people that have come from large enterprise and sit on mid-sized business boards, and they don't have that ability to flex. So it's a huge recruitment issue when we're talking about business continuity and succession planning, that we consider the flexibility and that agility of mindset for leaders at a leadership level and a board level. The second issue we discovered, and is a major aspect of being an MSB, is that they are people focused but people starved. When I conducted the interviews across the country, I was struck by how much directors of mid-sized business value their people. They talk about it consistently. They have a real connection and a responsibility to their people, so much so that it impacts their growth. So the CBI criticised mid-sized business some years ago for not having an adequate growth ambition. When you go and talk to mid-sized business leaders, they're very protective of what they've created. They call it a family-like culture, a family environment. They don't want to lose what makes them special. They don't want to lose that humanity. So this relationship that they have with people permeates their strategy and their ambition. I think this contribution particularly makes them even more important as a national role model. They prove the case that we can have profitability with humanity, and it is possible. They are committed to their football sponsorships, their local teams. They walk through the towns in which they're intertwined, and they're proud to do so. And I think this is, for us, should not be, it's a real intangible to say that MSB's leaders as a collective can be a leadership role model for large and small business, but they prove the case. Think about all the statistics I shared with you at the beginning about their contribution financially and intangibly, yet this is how much they value people. So they prove the case that both is possible. And in fact, it's possibly because they value people so highly. Peter Drucker coined the phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Maybe it's because of their relationship and responsibility to the people in their charge that they are so successful. I will also add that while leaders have this massive connectivity and responsibility for people, they also have an impending skill shortage. It's a crisis for mid-sized business leaders, and there's a range of issues why that's occurring. In the research, we learned that they have attempted to address this internally through reskilling, but that's not enough. It's not a scalable solution, and it's not working to address attrition or growth demands. While many MSBs are taking steps, we see from an evidence perspective a different picture. For example, only 37% of mid-sized businesses have apprenticeships. Compare that to mid-sized businesses, or what we call the Mittelstand in Germany, that's 75%. 37, 75. It's available to all mid-sized business leaders. 37% have taken it up. It's the same when it comes to internships. 33% of UK MSBs have internships compared to Germany, which is less than half. So when we know there's an impending crisis, MSBs know it's on the top of their agenda in terms of priorities at a leadership level and a board level, but the strategies in place to address it are simply not there. What also isn't there is mature recruitment practices or retention practices, and I think I'm in good company with the Tyndall Parry partners today, because the MSBs are not using what we would call contemporary approaches to recruitment, not using psychometric profiling, not using robust interview strategies, not considering talent pipelines and working with local universities to fuel inner graduate programs. These are more sophisticated skills and talent pipeline measures. MSBs are not considering that. They're still thinking like small businesses in their recruitment practices. I think the pace at which the recruitment market has evolved in terms of using science as opposed to perhaps relationships to recruit has evolved very quickly, because there are plenty of large businesses that don't use it as well. But yes, I think a lot of mid-sized business leaders are self-made. So they've actually grown their business from small to large, and it's about maturing the mindset of using different practices. I'd hazard a guess, I've got no evidence for this, but if you consider the support that is out there, that they're extrapolating from large enterprise, it's all around systems, processes, finance. It's not generally around the people. So I think maybe there's parts, we've got an advocacy job. In fact, it's one of the most important things. The more advisory work I do, and the longer I led in businesses, the single silver bullet was getting your team right. And for small and mid-sized business, it's even more important, because the influence the wrong person can have in a mid-sized business is much bigger than the wrong person in a large environment. So I talk about this a lot in other forums, but psychometric profiling and robust recruitment and understanding how that person fits is vital. But it's a science now. It's not just a nice to have. There's so many complexities with the lead. I spend most of my advisory work at the moment working on transitioning leader mindset from small business to mid-size or larger businesses to manage people better, but at the same time not becoming large enterprise. So it's about having a maturity of systems and processes and approaches that can manage a volume of people. And also in a small business, I think particularly in the areas that I work, which is in technology, we have a lot of accidental leaders and accidental managers who are really good at their functional skill set, but have never been taught to lead or manage. So it's often about, people talk a lot about retention strategies. People will stay if they're happy and they're well led and they have mastery and autonomy, much more so than a gym membership or spirulous share options. It's about creating enrichment in the working environment, and that again is a science. And mid-sized business leaders that get it and prioritise their people do invest in making that mental leap in terms of their own leadership, but also building the capability of their team leaders. It's a very hot topic at the moment. I want to just touch on one other piece of information we learned and revealed from the study about people, and that is a lack of diversity amongst mid-sized business leaders at the board level. So I could only describe it as medieval. And when I talk about diversity, I don't just mean gender, I mean age and ethnicity. In one of the focus groups, I was told all the good women are gone. So that's partly what we're facing. I wanted to introduce them to, half a dozen aspiring NEDs that I know that would all make excellent contributors in their environments, but that wasn't my role at the time. I want to pull out that particularly diversity for mid-sized business isn't just about the female quotient. This is, again, just my hypothesis. This isn't from the research, but age is a tremendous advantage at the board level that we're not truly acknowledging. So MSB leaders have almost zero diversity across the board, and worryingly very few strategies to address it. And we understand that when we're in the bunker and someone's throwing grenades at us, you want to work with someone you trust, so you draw on your network. But it keeps the network and the information closed. And whether it's a formal NED or an informal non-executive advisor, which a lot of MSBs tend to opt for because it doesn't come with the encumbrance of a formal director, youth can play an important role on a board. And I'll just leave you with one stat in this regard. 1/3 of the world's customers is now under 30. 1/3 of the world's customers, 60% of the population in Africa is under 30, 66%. In Asia, it's 48%, and in LATAM, it's 38%. So if you're in a business or being part of it that's in export, chances are half your population is under 30. Now, in contrast, the average age of a non-executive director just hit 60. It went up 2 years in the last 2 years. The average age of a board member is 60. Half the world, under 30. Half the world's customers are under 30. There is a disconnect there. So age, ethnicity, gender can mainline straight into strategic discussions, insight that you can't buy in. So let's not or use interchangeably experience and expertise that comes from age, because experience and expertise can come from youth as well. And youth will do a large job of bridging the technology gap, which we'll get to now, or I'm going to significantly run out of time. Technology. The benefit of being an MSB was most strongly felt in the instance of technology. MSBs are more capable than large or small business of linking specific technology investments with strategic outcomes. In plain language, that means they're more able to use technology to realise their ambitions than small or large business. Some technology investments for MSBs were introduced by necessity because of the skills shortage, while others were as a consequence of being large enough to invest in enterprise level technology and systems that they couldn't do as a small company. Our research suggests that where technology is central to an MSB, the fluency levels were really high around what is technology, digitisation, transformation, etc. However, that's a very small percentage of mid-sized business. The much broader population of mid-sized business have a massive gap in technology fluency. And it's holding them back in terms of their growth opportunities and their growth ambition. In the companies where technology was core, the board could have sensible, rational, intelligent discussions around technology investments and how to realise them. However, in the focus groups, we heard back from respondents deep frustration of sometimes particularly non-executive directors that are brought in to provide technology expertise, frustration about not being able to have coherent discussions around technology and technology investments. In short, small population of MSBs have technology fluency and are able to attract and retain high caliber tech people. But for everybody else, big gap and really difficult to recruit expertise into that environment because it's not a conducive environment that someone that's good at tech wants to join. So we've got a self-fulfilling prophecy around technology in the bulk of the MSB market. This makes it difficult to improve performance. Now take, for example, this very basic continuum of technology terms. So we've got digitization at one end, transformation at the other. We've got some MSBs doing substitution and automation, but they think it's transformation. MSB leaders and board members are using these terms interchangeably. Can't have AI without data, not realizing AI can produce data. Not understanding how emerging technologies, machine learning we have on our phone, AI we have on our phone. They're not understanding the applications to their business. And no matter what the sector, technology fluency was a major gap at board level. One of our key recommendations in the report is that MSBs should actively pursue at a board level a digital culture which includes education and demystification. So back to my proposal that resources should be accessed in the privacy of one's home. No one wants to stick their hand up and say, can you please explain AI to me at the next board meeting? Yeah. So someone somewhere has to start advocating a neutral learning platform that addresses emerging contemporary issues and we demystify them. And knowledge isn't in itself important, it's the alignment of that knowledge and alignment of the board around emerging issues and contemporary issues that's just as important. So having 2 or 3 members of the board fluent in these issues, fantastic. It's the alignment so we can make informed and strategic decisions and investments as a board of MSBs. Now, in the home stretch now. I haven't seen anyone nodding yet, so that's a good idea at 9:15. You're all doing amazingly. Brexit, the most significant influencer of MSBs. I think, try not to be political here, but Brexit and the uncertainty of Brexit has had the most worrying impact on MSBs you could imagine. So this is the context in which mid-sized business leaders are incorporating their data and making their decisions. And it's the uncertainty of Brexit that's causing uncertainty in decision-making and strategic planning. Directors' responses largely echo that public uncertainty. However, our results show a much higher level of concern and prioritisation at a board level of Brexit than small or large business. Now, more than half of MSBs export to the EU, so it's no surprise that this is top of the board agenda. Now, for the Northwest economy, this is particularly important as nearly 3/4 of MSBs export to the EU. So 3/4 of the MSBs in this economy export to the EU, and they haven't known what's going on for years. The North also has a higher percentage of exporters generally doing business with the EU than any other region at 91%. So if you consider how the MSBs have achieved their past growth in the Northwest and nationally, half of MSBs export to the EU. They've built their growth and they've had their success based on access to that market from a customer perspective. They've also fueled much of their skills and talent pipeline from the EU. And we're just about to close that, or in their minds, there's uncertainty that that market is going to be accessed. So what kind of impact do you think that's happening on their growth ambition and their planning? So our results revealed that domestic expansion 40% of MSBs are now planning to expand domestically, not internationally. So 40% of MSBs make good on that plan. How competitive do you think this environment's about to become? And what do you do when you're in a competitive environment to survive? You innovate. So let's have a look at what's happening in terms of innovation. MSBs, as you saw from the earlier slides about how important they are to the economy, produce new solutions, new tech, new capabilities. They're better at innovating, scaling, prototyping, deploying MVPs than anybody else. And they've traditionally reaped greater rewards in terms of IP revenues and yields. However, just when we need MSBs to innovate most, they're cautious. They're weighing up every innovation decision with itemization of the risks and the potential implications. They are overanalyzing every innovation investment. It seems they're now balancing the risks of innovating against the risks of not innovating, of failing at innovation versus the risk of not innovating at all. And that is a huge concern. It would have been a concern in its own right in terms of maintaining our European competitiveness, let alone our global competitiveness in that value creation economy role that the MSBs are supposed to be playing. How are they supposed to keep leading the charge in value creation, investment, if they're not innovating? And they have a dampened and cautious approach to innovation. In short, they're in full consolidation mode. They think a door is closing on their market in the EU, a door is closing on a wider talent pool in the EU. They've got domestic expansion planned instead of international, so they know that's going to be highly competitive, and they're worried about their people. So what do? You consolidate. And again, to quote the management theorist, there's a potential risk of managing for decline. So my concern, and why I am banging on every door, is that this is a perfect storm. We need an intervention and we need a catalyst from government, but also from the economic actors in the ecosystem to recognise MSBs and support them with tailored resources that meet their specific challenges. Something as simple as helping MSBs understand the difference between innovation and improvement. Both are good, both serve completely different terms, but our research showed that, again, they're using these terms interchangeably and they're not sure about how to create an innovation culture and innovation processes that scale. I'm going to finish off now. I know you all have to go places. So all this is culminating into a growth ambition that is moderate at best. We did identify a range of drivers that MSBs use to scale and to grow. They're looking for new markets, innovating, new staff, particularly leadership to scale, and this was cited as the number one retardant of growth. The one thing holding them back was having the right leaders to scale operations. New structures, systems and processes to scale, and new technology to scale. So we know how they're intending to scale, but they're not applying these tools with vigour. There's no stated outcome of growth as part of the strategic planning. In fact, growth is seen as a byproduct of good operations and sound management rather than a stated ambition. And that's worrying. That should be worrying for our community, our business community. We should want to be fueling our growth. We should be wanting to state that as an ambition. It doesn't need to be extreme or high risk. It can balance the variables of protecting our people. But it was a stark omission in the responses from our leaders. Finally, for those of you that are in the finance game in the room, MSBs still have a troubled relationship with finance. They find it difficult to navigate. They find it difficult to find partners that they have single partner or single points of entry. They need to find that they're often finding they're having to deal with 4, 5 or 6 different partners. And again, An opportunity cost is not being aware of finance options available to them. We know that an underpinning driver of growth is access to finance. Our results show that there's no desire to pursue finance options to fuel growth. And so I think the finance industry has got a job to do to stimulate that demand for inquiry. I meet with lots of people all the time that have very informed opinions and hypotheses about how to solve the problems, and they're always collective. The problem with MSBs is they don't have a growth ambition. The problem with MSBs is, and I think what you've articulated really well, is that MSBs aren't uniform. The response rates we have were incredibly mixed, and because they were so large, you'd have to say, and if you look at any of the government statistics, it's a segment of the market that is highly diverse in terms of structural makeup, corporate makeup, and sectors. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And when we talked about technology before, I'm about to get to sort of two things government could do. They're quite targeted at different aspects of the problem. And I think one of the biggest things we can do is not see we can see MSBs as a single category and acknowledge them, but don't assume they all need the same thing. So some I know are turning over 80, 100 million, have no need for a board. They've got private equity investment, but they meet informally and ad hoc, and it's very leadership team driven. The concept of a board is completely irrelevant. For others that it might be in the healthcare sector, it's a requirement. So I think you're absolutely right, and you've really illustrated the point well that it's horses for courses. I'll just finish up now. With all this in mind, what are we asking MSBs in this local economy and nationally to do? We're asking them to maintain previous financial contribution to the economy and ideally increase it. We're asking them to continue and to employ people at current levels, mostly in regional economies. We're asking them to continue to create these original ideas and value creation initiatives and be role models in human-centred leadership. So we're asking them to do all that. But do you remember the first slide? MSBs are woefully unrecognised and unsupported. So that's what MSBLeaders is trying to do. Now, we're not the only ones that have been trying to do it. Grant Thornton, BDO, McKinsey's have all been out since 2011 espousing the virtues of mid-sized business and trying to be their advocate and trying to be their champion and tailor their services towards them. But they've failed. And I know why they've failed. They've failed because they're not acting as a collective. They're trying to sell product and they're trying to access a market, albeit credibly. But we need to act as a collective. So we're holding a summit in November that we're bringing together the leaders of national economic strategy, HMRC, some of our growth agencies, and mid-sized business leaders themselves and the economic actors in terms of the professional services to come together and say, right, we're all going to sign up to one classification. And you know what? We need to get behind some support that's online and easily accessible and practical and usable. So government need to do just two things to make a difference. One, recognise MSBs as a distinct category. HMRC use 3 different classifications for their research. So how that translates into regulation, I don't know. And provide tailored MSB policy, regulation, conduct research to provide evidence-based support. It's the only 2 things they need to do, and there would be a massive impact for MSBs. For leaders of MSBs, here are 8 things you can do right now. Increase gender and age diversity at the director level. Go speak to Tyndall Parry if you don't know how to. Increase learning culture at the director and leadership level. Make it okay to learn continuously and consistently. And that's not just at a board level, that's at a leadership level, because sometimes we get so stuck working in the business that we forget to skill up to work on the business. Invest in better understanding applying technology opportunities and adopt contemporary recruitment management retention approaches. There are 47 recommendations, explicit recommendations in the report. These are just a few that relate to the themes I've shared today. increase apprenticeships and or reskilling, identify strategies for innovation and improvement as a countermeasure to domestic competition that's going to happen, increase understanding of and identity finance options to fuel growth, and require specific experience in MSBs from professional services and advisors. I'd probably add to that leadership. If you're going to recruit, make sure someone's got that agility mindset and can manage structurally from a finance perspective and a process engineering perspective the agility that comes in a small business infrastructure.